For so many people, the world of IVF is this intense roller coaster of hope and, let's be honest, a lot of heartbreak. But what if there's a way to change the odds? What if a single test could make all the difference? Well, we're going to dive into a technology that promises just that. But it's also one of the most fiercely debated topics in all of reproductive medicine.
I mean, that's a huge question, right? Just think about it. The chance to avoid the incredible pain of pregnancy loss, and not just for one person, but on a massive scale. This isn't some far-off sci-fi idea. It's the core promise of a genetic test being used in IVF clinics every single day.
And that is where things get really interesting. Because while the promise is absolutely massive, the science, the stats, and even how we define success are all up for debate. So today we're going to break down this huge controversy by looking at some pretty stunning new data.
Okay, so to really get this whole debate, we first have to understand the basic problem this test is trying to fix. It's a fundamental biological hurdle, and it's one of the main reasons for IVF failure and pregnancy loss.
The key word here is aneuploidy. All it means is that an embryo has the wrong number of chromosomes, maybe a few too many or a few too few. And this is way more common than you might think. In fact, it's the main culprit behind about 65% of all first trimester miscarriages.
And this is the perfect way to think about it. You know, if an embryo's DNA is its instruction manual for how to grow, then an aneuploid embryo has a faulty manual right from the very beginning. It might have entire chapters missing or pages that are just duplicated, which, as you can imagine, usually means it just can't develop into a healthy pregnancy.
So if the problem is a flawed instruction manual, the logical solution seems pretty simple, right? Check the manual before you try to use it. And that's exactly what this technology does. It's called Preimplantation Genetic Testing for Aneuploidy, or PGT-A for short.
The process itself is pretty amazing when you think about it. So, a few days after fertilization, a highly skilled embryologist takes a tiny sample, just a few cells, from the part of the embryo that's going to become the placenta. That little sample gets sent off for genetic analysis to literally count the chromosomes. And then, only the embryos that are found to be euploid, meaning they have the correct number, are chosen to be transferred back to the uterus. So, on the surface, this sounds like a total no-brainer, right? Why wouldn't you want to pick the embryo that has the best possible genetic chance? Well, this is where the debate gets incredibly intense, and it all boils down to one simple question. How do you actually measure success?
Okay, this slide is probably the most important part of the whole debate. You have to understand these two different ways of looking at success. On the left, you've got the cumulative live birth rate, or CLBR. Think of this as the big picture. From one single egg retrieval, what's your overall chance of having a baby, using all the embryos you created? But on the right, you have the live birth rate per embryo transfer, LBR-PET. This is way more specific. It asks, for this one specific embryo we're about to transfer, what's its chance of becoming a baby?
And here's what pretty much everyone agrees on. PGT-A is a selection tool. It can't magically fix an embryo with the wrong number of chromosomes, so it doesn't increase the total number of healthy embryos you have. That means your big picture odds, the CLBR, don't really change. But by helping you pick the right embryo to transfer first, it massively boosts the odds that the transfer you're doing right now will actually work. And that can save an incredible amount of time, money, and emotional pain.
Now, because PGT-A doesn't improve that big picture number, major professional groups like the American Society for Reproductive Medicine have been pretty cautious. Their official line has basically been, look, we can't recommend this for everyone. Because the thinking was, if you just keep transferring all your embryos one by one without testing, you'll eventually get to the healthy one anyway.
But what if that's not the whole story? What if the journey to find that healthy embryo is filled with devastating losses? Well, this is where everything changes. A massive new analysis from 2023 is forcing everyone to rethink the real value of PGT-A. And honestly, the findings are just stunning.
Just look at this number, 14,983. According to a new analysis of over 400,000 IVF cycles in the US, this is the estimated number of miscarriages that were avoided in a single year, 2023, all because patients chose to use PGT-A.
And this graph, wow, this graph shows you exactly why. The orange line is the miscarriage rate for patients who didn't use PGT-A. See how it just skyrockets with age? For women over 42, it's over 50%. Now look at the blue line. These are the patients who did use PGT-A. It's incredible. It stays low and flat across every single age group. Get this, a woman over 42 using PGT-A has about the same risk of miscarriage as someone under 35 who doesn't. And it doesn't stop there. The analysis found another huge number, 6,619.
That's how many preterm and very preterm births, which are a major cause of health issues for newborns, were also likely avoided in 2023 thanks to PGT-A.
And again, the graph just tells the story so clearly. Just like with miscarriages, the risk of a preterm birth, that's the orange line, tends to go up without PGT-A. But that blue line, for the cycles with PGT-A, shows a consistently lower and much more stable risk of this really serious pregnancy complication.
Okay, this one adds another really important piece to the puzzle. It's about the decision to transfer just one embryo at a time, what they call ESET. Just focus on those bottom two lines, the blue and orange ones. They show that with PGT-A, the miscarriage rate stays nice and low. But for patients who don't use the test, that's the yellow and gray lines, the risk climbs dramatically, especially if they transfer more than one untested embryo. This shows how PGT-A gives doctors and patients the confidence to transfer a single, healthy embryo, which helps avoid the risks that come with twins or triplets.
So what does this all mean when you step back from the charts and the numbers? Well, it points to a massive human impact, and it's building a really powerful new argument in favor of this test.
So let's just recap what this data is telling us. The main takeaway is that PGT-A seems to create a shorter and, frankly, safer path to having a baby by weeding out the transfers that were just never going to work. And that last point there is just staggering. On top of the thousands of miscarriages that were prevented, the analysis suggests over 11,000 more could have been avoided if every patient had used the test.
Now, it is absolutely essential to be scientifically honest here. The study's authors are very clear. This is not the absolute gold standard of medical evidence, a randomized controlled trial. This is looking back at data, so the groups weren't perfectly matched.
But, and this is a huge but, they make a really powerful counter-argument. When you are looking at data from nearly 500,000 IVF cycles, the sheer scale of it becomes its own kind of evidence. They're basically saying that the differences are so big and so consistent that it's extremely likely we're seeing a real biological effect here, not just some statistical fluke.
So where does that leave us? We've got this fascinating conflict. The official guidance is cautious because PGT-A doesn't create more healthy embryos. But this massive new data set suggests it prevents thousands and thousands of traumatic losses on the way to finding one. And that brings us to the real question, not for scientists, but for you. What does success in this journey really mean? Is it just that overall chance of a baby? Or is it also about the path you take to get there and avoiding as much heartbreak as possible along the way?